Hi guys, today I'm going to be looking at the summer 2019 Macbeth question. So this is the AQA paper and this is the Macbeth question, which is about really exploring how far Shakespeare presents Macbeth as a violent character. In this tutorial I'm just going to look at approaching the extract, planning and thinking about how to respond to this task, and then I'm going to do another video with a grade 9 kind of full mark response so you can see what that should look like. So as always, when you get your extract, really important to have a look at this contextual info at the top. It can give you some clues about where it's from, what's happening. So as soon as I see that it's from Act 1, I know that in terms of drama, this is the exposition. The exposition is basically the intro to stuff. So it's usually introduction to character, to theme, it could be setting, but it's about establishing certain things. And therefore this, as we know, is one of our first impressions that we get of Macbeth. The very first impression is in Act 1, Scene 1, and that impression is that he could potentially be involved with something really kind of dubious and sinister, and that's because the witches, of course, are planning to meet with Macbeth, and so we already have that sense of, is he going to be involved in something he shouldn't be? But here in Act 1, Scene 2, when the captain is telling Duncan, who we know is the king, about Macbeth's part in the battle, we get a sort of fantastic impression of him. We get the sense of his bravery, his commitment to the king against all odds. He is, successful in this battle, and nothing fazed him. And so then we take that extract and then we're thinking about the question as a whole, which is about a violent character. Now, I always try and think about alternative words to use as part of my essay, but also for me to really unpick what this question's focusing on. So violence, other words I could think of is maybe brutality, in this context as a soldier fighting, but also it could be murder. Violence could be born of aggression. So I sort of just really unpick the question. What am I looking at? I'm looking at the idea of, as violence, I'm thinking about, this is something around physical behaviour. So as always, we're asked to think about the presentation within the extract, but also the play as a whole. So then at this point, I would make myself a little planning table at the bottom, and as soon as ideas come to me, I think about the beginning, by which I mean kind of Act 1 and 2, the middle, which I mean Act 3, and the end, by which I'm meaning Act 4 and 5, really. So trying to draw on a range of different things I can think about. So I would then at this point have a read through my extract, which you can do now, and we get this idea of, this is kind of a report, he's reporting back to the king. So it's giving us this sense of overview, it's giving us background info, and it's got this kind of detached, sort of non-biased impression of Macbeth. It's allowing Shakespeare to tell audiences something about him before we even meet him. So it's successful in creating these first impressions. So we're thinking about this in terms of the kind of structural significance of this. And I would want students to be thinking about, we've still not met Macbeth at this point, but we're hearing things about him, we're forming an opinion. And I link this to, many of you might have done, of Mice and Men, and in that with Sir Curly's wife, the men talk about her, and then she's described before she's ever given a chance to talk. Writers do this for a number of different reasons, and in this context, it's to give us this initial, very positive, glowing impression of Macbeth. We hear that this battle looked doubtful. Macbeth was in a very difficult situation, and we're given this simile of comparing sort of the him and Banquo really as being two swimmers that cling together and choke their heart. So they're almost kind of drowning. This is such a challenging situation for them. And we get information that, this rebel MacDonald and his, multiplying villainies. So this idea of Macbeth being hugely outnumbered swarm upon him, and there's something quite animalistic about the way that they move. And we get this sense of, a very difficult battle situation, but all's too weak for all of these efforts from this enemy were nothing because of brave Macbeth. So this adjective brave, it really links in terms of context to the chivalric code, this idea of men, soldiers, bravery, honour, these are ideals at the time, and Macbeth is congratulated. He really deserves that kind of qualification of being brave, and he rejects kind of fate and fortune, and he's ignoring the fact that it's against all these odds. And with his brandish something, he's got his sword kind of aloft, and that's smoked with bloody execution. So the brandished steel, I quite like the sibilance of that particular image. The brandished steel, it sounds cutting, it sounds like a weapon that would do significant damage. And then going into the metaphor that's smoked with bloody execution. Two interesting things here, this hyperbole of smoked, the idea that it's, the sword is moving so fast it's almost sort of machine-like in that it's smoking, it's used so much. Also evokes images perhaps of blood spatter, as reinforced then with the adjective bloody. But I find execution a really interesting noun, because to me an execution is, whether we agree with the death penalty or not, execution is a more sort of legal process, or one of justice perhaps. And so we're getting the sense that his violence is authorized, it is acceptable, it is appropriate on a battlefield. And like Valor's minion, so he's acting on behalf of honor and chivalry. He is representative of valor, and we can see that because it's capitalized, it's personified. And then he carves out his passage, and that carved, again, it just reinforces his weapon, his sword that's being used to create literally a kind of passage for which he can get to his enemy, until indeed, as we're told, he faced the slave, which never shook hands nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chaps, fixed his head upon the battlements. So we get this image of, quite a violent, brutal death here. Macbeth's enemy is unseamed, almost imagining material being pulled apart. And then we've obviously got this reference here to the beheading. The fact it's put onto the battlements is this, it's here as a lesson, isn't it, really, to others. Don't betray the king, because this will be the consequence. And obviously I've just made a note here of the deep irony of this, is that obviously this is Macbeth's ultimate demise himself. So I've thought about the extract. What I then move on to do really is to think quite carefully about what else can I bring in. So I'm thinking about the beginning. Well, obviously this extract fits into this. I'm also going to think about, he talks about his black and deep desires, or his black and dark desires, which is in Act 1, Scene 4. Yeah. And this is when obviously Duncan is saying that his heir to the throne is going to be Malcolm, and Macbeth sort of also uses some metaphorical language to say, that's a step on which I must, I'll either step over or fall down over. So he sees Malcolm as this obstacle. But he thinks I beg your pardon, that was Act 1, Scene 3. I bet some of you were screaming that because you know the quotes better than me. Yeah, so this is when the witches have been telling him about the prophecy, he'll become king, and immediately in that aside he thinks about murder that is fantastical, and he thinks about these desires. I'm now like second guessing myself. I don't know. It's somewhere in Act 1, Scene 3 or 4. I've not got the play in front of me. Apologies. But anyway, certainly I'm going to think about his fantasy of committing violence. And then obviously we've got... I don't know why I've done this. I've got myself a little bit confused on this today. Apologies, guys. Also in Act 1 and 2, you know, this is where we get a lot of his violence. This is where at the end of Act 1, Scene 2, we see him saying, you know, talking about the dagger, come let me clutch thee. And also we just get the killing of King Duncan, you know, that act of regicide. So a lot of violence going on ultimately. And then in our midsections, you know, I'm thinking particularly about the killing of Banquo, but the abuse of power, the fact that violence is through, you know, he hires or forces people into acts of murder, but he doesn't get his own hands dirty. So I'd perhaps think about that from Act 3. And then in Act 4 and 5, I definitely think about Macduff's family being slaughtered, and his own violent death that he suffers at the hand of Macduff. So these are the sorts of things I'd be thinking about. Apologies for my scruffy planning and things here, but I don't know why, I'd obviously got myself a bit confused. But yeah, so a quick little plan like that. Organise your ideas, think about the things in relation to this question that you want to talk about. Okay, next video I'm going to show you how I move on from this into a full mark grade 9 response. Thanks for watching.